Okay, we're now recording our afternoon session, and it will be introduced by Marcy Cohn.
Okay, so our afternoon session, our presenter is Brett Milano, a journalist and writer. The title of the session is I Bet They Won't Play This Song on the Radio, The Uncensored History of Music Censorship. Brett's writing credentials are nearly as extensive as his record collection. During a long and productive career, he's examined music from every angle, always most interested in the strong personalities that create and support the songs. His first book, Vinyl Junkies, Adventures in Record Collecting from 2001, was well ahead of the current vogue for vinyl, and the first book to explore the passion and creativity of collectors ranging from famous musicians to unknown enthusiasts. His subsequent books also illuminated some neglected corners of the music world. Don't All Thank Me at Once from 2015 told the story of Scott Miller, one of the 80s great cult heroes. The Sound of Our Town from 2006 and 300 Songs for 300 Years from 2020 told the story of two vital cities, respectively Boston and New Orleans, through their music. Brett has lived in both cities and currently writes for major publications in each, with a weekly music column in the Boston Herald and a contributing editor slot at New Orleans music magazine Offbeat. He published his first short story in the music fiction anthology Tales from the House Band, Plus One Press. His story, Fancy, provides a rather unlikely explanation for the disappearance of country pop icon Bobby Gentry. Brett is likely the only music journalist to ever interview punk legend Joey Ramone and Barry Manilow on the same day. His visibility in Boston goes back to the 80s when he wrote multiple weekly pieces in the Boston Globe, and he remains one of the city's most popular music writers. During the 90s, he covered the local music circuit in his Boston Phoenix column, Sellers by Starlight. This inadvertently provided one of his career highlights when the singer of the beloved Boston band Letters to Cleo wrote the song Sellers by Starlight about being interviewed by him. And so that was the bio provided by Brett. I will add that Brett and I have been friends since the 90s. I met him in my pre-library career as a music journalist. And I will also tell you that he is far too humble to share this anecdote. The two of us were hanging out at a show and a stranger came up to him and thanked him for all that he has done for the local music scene. He's a real treasure. When I describe him to other people, I say he literally wrote the book about Boston rock. So I'm going to turn it over to Brett. Brett, you're muted.
Right. Can you hear me now? Yes, you can. Thank you so much, Marcy. It's great to see you all here. And I'm going to, one of the great pleasures for me of doing this talk is that I get to play DJ for you all. So I'm going to start off just by setting the tone for this talk with a little word of wisdom from Monty Python.
I bet you they won't play this song on the radio. I bet you they won't play this new song. It's not that it's or controversial, just that the in-words are awfully strong. You can't say on the radio or you can't even say I'd like to you someday, unless you're a doctor with a very large. So I bet you they won't play this song on the radio. I bet you they dare well program it. I bet you the Ingold program directors will think it's a load of horse.
Yes. Well, that song was released in the 80s where it was actually played on the radio. And I'm sorry to say it is pretty much outdated at this point. For one thing, music censorship sadly doesn't sound like that anymore. You can now do it in all sorts of digital ways that kind of leave the essence of a word untacked and make you know really well what word you're not hearing. For another thing, the radio is no longer the ultimate kind of arbiter of what's respectable and what isn't, but we'll get into that in a bit. But the main point I want to say is that we're dealing with a situation that is and has always been very cyclical. Over the course of the entirety of popular music, We've gone through some times that have been very permissive, and we've gone through some times that have been very repressive. I think what is really unique about the current moment is that it's both, pretty much equal amounts of both at the same time. As a lot of you are librarians, you probably know that there is more pressure on libraries than there's ever been before. If you were in Florida, you might be dealing with books being removed from the shelves, and that might be continuing for a while. On the other hand, if you look at what music there is that is available and what music people are hearing and what music is on, it is completely would have been unthinkable even 1 decade ago, certainly unthinkable in the 80s and 90s. Look, 3 or 4 of the songs are from which involve a whole lot of language and situations that you probably couldn't deal with in the past. The N-word, which I wouldn't even say myself, is used in some of the Drake songs. Every other word is. Meanwhile, Doja Cat song Paint the Town Red includes the line, "Bitch, I'm in your shit if you send for me." That's it's kind of a good female empowerment thing, but you couldn't really say that in a record before. And in fact, probably the most innocent song on the top 10 right now is by Taylor Swift. It's called "Cruel Summer," and it's about getting drunk in your car because a sexual hookup went wrong. So thank you, Taylor, for that little dose of All-American innocence there. So how did we get here? That's the question I want to ask. And I want to explode the myth that it all has to do with rap or even with rock and roll, because really things started way earlier. The whole the unease, maybe the tenuous love-hate relationship that society at large has with pop culture has been there for basically as long as there's been pop culture. And the earliest music censorship I could come up with, at least in terms of pop music, goes back to the 1930s and 40s with a song written by the great American composer Cole Porter. This song is called "I Get a Kick Out of You." I think most of you will have heard this song, but you may not have heard it with the proper lyrics, the original lyrics that Cole Porter wrote. And here is that particular verse as sung by that great American outlaw, Frank Sinatra.
I get no kick from champagne. Mere alcohol doesn't thrill me at all. So tell me, why should it be true that I get a kick out of you? Some, they may go for cocaine. I'm sure that if I took even one sniff, it would bore me terrifically too. Yet I get a kick out of you.
So even though he just told us he doesn't actually want any, the very reference to cocaine in that song did ruffle some feathers and did get censored. The reason it got censored was because of the Hays Commission, which was formed in the, I believe, the 30s, and set standards for what you could say, what you could do in a movie. Standards about nudity, any glimpses of nudity were out. Anything to do with sexuality was pretty much out, like Marlene Dietrich kissing a woman on screen. You couldn't do that. Any violence was out. Even really intense film noir kind of, some movies had to be toned down. And that song, "I Get a Kick Out of You," was written by Cole Porter for a movie, or for a Broadway show that became a movie, and therefore he had to tone it down. The words he wrote instead were "some like the perfume from Spain," and that's in most of the versions that have been recorded since. And irony of ironies, the name of the movie and show that it was written for, "Anything Goes." So anything did not quite go in that particular case. So when we are dealing with the early days of pop culture, the fledgling days of rock and roll, it's not so much that there was a clear board of censorship or anything like that. It's more like there were social norms that were accepted. And it was generally presumed that you just would not say certain things on records or on the radio or refer to certain things. I mean, innocent love songs were very much the norm. Even words like hell and damn were not really, they were not really often said on recordings, much less in concert. It was happening in the blues world, in the blues and jazz tradition. I mean, things were very freewheeling in that side of the world. There's a great book out called Madam, which is about Polly Adler, who ran a brothel in New York City during the Jazz Age, and her house band was led by Duke Ellington. And so if you go back to early blues records, some of which were released, like oh, I Want a Little Sugar in My Bowl by Bessie Smith. I mean, you could refer to certain things, but they were not really considered for commercial consumption. Actual pop music still was very repressed, very vague about what it was getting at, to the extent that even a song like God Only Knows by the Beach Boys, one of the great love songs of all time, was banned by a lot of radio stations just because using the word God in that context was considered sacrilegious or objectionable. In fact, things got so bad that this record we're about to hear got banned, not because of the lyrics, because as you're going to hear, there were not any lyrics in this record. Let me get, sorry, it's going to take a minute to call up the link here.
And then I switched to
And
Liberty
because we're
Mutual
dealing
and
with
saved
YouTube, we
hundreds.
have to fast
I
forward
know,
past the ads,
exactly.
which are the bane of YouTube. All right. A small taste of that record. That record's called Rumble by Link Wray, and it does sound like a rumble, and parents got nervous just because of the atmosphere on that record. They were maybe afraid that if their kids heard that record, it might, just the whole sound of the record and the whole sound of anticipating a rumble might somehow entice their kids to become juvenile delinquents. And the wonderful thing about it is they were right. Of course, rock and roll entices you to become a juvenile delinquent. That's what it's for. But but not if parents could help it when it came to that particular record. So we are dealing with an era, maybe getting up to the late 60s, when things were very nice in terms of what pop culture was. Very little was getting said, you know, very little that would cause objection, until this happened.
Give me an M. Give me a U.
Yeah, I think you know where we're going with that one. That was from the Woodstock soundtrack, which was a record that was cherished in a lot of high schools, mainly because of moments like that. To hear something like that on a record was pretty much unheard of at that time. But 60s counterculture was starting to happen. And when it happened, the culture had something it couldn't quite deal with. There was a lot of political things being said in songs. There was opposition to the Vietnam War, certainly. And the whole sense of sort of cultural alternatives being offered extended to what was being said in music. The word fuck was never even on a record until maybe 68, 69. That Woodstock soundtrack was one of the very first. John Lennon said it in the song Working Class Hero. John Lennon, of course, had ruffled feathers earlier when he had said the Beatles were more popular than Jesus, was merely talking about the fact that more kids were listening to the Beatles than were going to church, which was certainly true at that time. And that led to a wave of record burnings, DJs getting in on the act. The Beatles, when they toured America after John Lennon made that statement, were suddenly not selling out the same places they had sold out before. They played Shea Stadium a second time, and it wasn't as big an event. It didn't sell out. So even somebody like that saying something on a record would run awry of the system that was in place. But you listen to what was being said and what people were getting away with saying in music during that era, and things were starting to loosen up a whole lot. This also extended to drugs being referred to in songs, and this was on AM radio, which was the most respectable thing in the world. The kids that were 10 and 12 were listening to AM radio and hearing all the hit songs. And they were starting to hear songs like, oh, say, White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane, 8 Miles High by the Byrds, songs that possibly, maybe referred to the drug experience, and a general sense beginning to take hold. Fortunately, during this time, a lot of this stuff just went right over the heads of the young hip factions of the establishment, and they would hear a lot of these songs and would not know what the artists were talking about. Prime example, I'm going to play you a little snippet of a performance that happened on the Lawrence Welk Show, which was a TV show that was the ultimate in respectability, led by this ancient old accordion player, listened to by your parents and grandparents during that day. Anything that was on this show was squeaky clean delicious. And here's a song that
Thank you very much. Now here's an
taking off the
attractive couple,
charts.
Gail
played on
Farrell
the
from
show.
Durant, Oklahoma, Dick Dale from Algona, Iowa. Excuse me. Let's listen to Gail and Dale and one of the newer songs.
One toke over the line, sweet Jesus, one toke over the line. Sitting downtown in a railway station, one toke over the line. Waiting for the
I do believe you can look that whole song up on YouTube. It's really too wonderful for words. But they thought this was a nice little song about Jesus. It was in fact called One Toke Over the Line, which refers to the experience of having smoked too much weed, basically. But a lot of parents and radio programmers who heard a record like that may not have known what a toke was, or they did know, but they certainly weren't about to let on. Therefore, a song like that could make the charts and people could hear it. So little by little, things were slipping through. You still couldn't say a lot of words on a record. That became a taboo. George Carlin recorded his famous routine about the 7 words you can never say on television. You still couldn't say them on television, but he did get to record that routine, and it was sold on records with a big sticker on the front saying, this record might corrupt your mind and make the country lose the war if you listen to it. The Rolling Stones recorded a song called Star Star. I think we all know what the real title of that song was. It said the same phrase referring to somebody that has sex with famous people, maybe 50 or 60 times in that song. So maybe your local radio station were not playing this, but the boundaries of what you could say on a record and could say in the context of music were definitely loosening up. People were by and large getting away with it. Censorship was not really that strongly in place during this era. And that got even more loosened up once we got into the 70s and we entered the disco era. Disco gets a bad rap at this moment, and it has ever since, but it was really responsible for loosening up a lot of taboos in music, because people were it was the 70s was over, and people, and as a result, the libido of pop culture was getting loosened up in a way it never had before. For instance, in one of the early disco records, you could hear this.
No, No, I.
I believe the expression is "I'll have what she's having." That record by Cachasas was a chart hit around 1972, and you can only guess how many 10-year-old guys or gals heard that song and said, "Mommy, Daddy, what is that girl doing? What is happening to her on that song?" So during this era, basically because the political scene got a bit quieter, a lot of it came down to sex, and sexuality was being dealt with in hit songs in a way it had not been before. Even in disco, you had the Village People, who probably put gay sexuality into the mainstream as much as it had been up to that time. And if you listen to what the Village People were doing, there is not a single reference to sex anywhere in their catalog. That was the joke. It was complete innuendo. What they did was write songs about how much fun it was to hang out with the boys at the YMCA, and what great adventures you could have in the Navy, and how good it was to be a macho man and work out at the gym. Their albums are even but because what they were really talking about, a middle America kind of went for it. And you can still, if you go to a wedding today, you'll still see that YMCA line dance being done, mostly, or I'd say to some extent, by people who did not know what the song was referring to in the first place. So while we were having a grand party in America, and meanwhile over across the water in England, they were being severely terrorized by this.
I think he's muted.
I think you're frozen, Brett.
We lost Brett, I think. Here we go. Unmute. Can you?
Yeah, am I back? I'm sorry. We had
Yeah, you're back. You're frozen again. Yeah.
I swear this all worked perfectly when we did a practice run the beginning of the week.
Right, I'm sure. So when he comes back, if we could suggest that he turn off if he's playing music or video, to turn off his camera. And that would use a little less bandwidth. I
He
think-
also may be having a hard time just with his connection.
Yeah. Because I think he's off. Oh, there he's back. Hi. Can you hear me? I can't hear you, but I suggest to turn your camera off and then make sure you're
He's
unmuted.
muted.
Yeah, unmute. Brett, if you can hear me, unmute. I think he's frozen again. Hi, I think you're back. Can you unmute?
Yeah, let me see. I'm
So-
unmuted.
Yeah, good. I can hear you. If you turn your video off, it'll maybe take a little less bandwidth. Maybe that'll-
I could also do the audio sharing if you want to like message me what songs I should be queuing up. I've got the one ready to go that you were playing when things went south.
Yeah, why don't you play that? Go ahead and play that while he's figuring.
Okay.
God save the Queen, the fascist regime. It made you a moron, potential hate bomb. God save the Queen, she ain't no human being. There is no future in England's dreaming. Tell me so, I know what you want, and tell me so, I know what you need. There's no future, no future, no future for you. God save the Queen, we mean it, man. We'll have a queen, God saves. God save the Queen, 'cause tourists are money. And our figurehead is not what she seems. Oh, God save history, God save your mad parade. Oh Lord God have mercy, all crimes are paid. Oh, when there's no future, they can't even see it. Where the power's in the just fear, where the poison in a human machine, where the future, your future. God save the Queen, we mean it, man. We have a queen, God saves. God save the Queen, we mean it, man. There is no future in England's dreaming. No future, no future, no future for you. No future, no future, no future for me.
Well, while we're waiting for Brett to get reconnected, I thought maybe we could all maybe comment on some of the things that he's talked about so far. If anybody has any comments or ideas about that to say, well, Brett's trying to get back on. We all have been here before with the Zoom meetings. Any ideas?
Well, I'm sure he's getting to this, but I remember well into the 80s, the whole Mies Commission, I think it was, that I believe it was headed up by Edwin Mies's, maybe his wife, but there was this whole back and forth between the Mies Commission and Frank Zappa about censorship in music. And, you know, the commission was particularly perturbed at some of the heavy metal stuff that was going on, Slayer and bands like that, satanic influences in heavy metal. And I'd be very curious to hear what he has to say about that. But that was, I remember I was growing up during that time, and, you know, as a kid making great fun of the Mies Commission and rooting for Zappa because he had some back and forth. He had some pretty famous televised interviews with some of the members who were kind of railing against this satanic music. And it was pretty interesting to hear Zappa's take on that.
We have one comment in the chat. Yamil, you wanted to comment on that?
No, just what I wrote that when I first heard about that song Rumble that Brett played earlier, that it was controversial, even though it was just an instrumental song, just based on the title.
So I mean, you know, with not even any text to argue about, right?
And no moaning, unlike the other song that I'm less surprised that was controversial.
Right. So any other comments?
The disco song with the moaning, I mean, in the 70s, you also heard that in Led Zeppelin. I mean, a whole lot of love. You see some interesting information about Robert Plant, perhaps.
Well, there's a disco singer named Betty Davis who did this whole string of albums that was very, you know, shall we say, forward, you know. I think one of her Nasty Girl or something like that, you know. Betty.
I had to buy them all from my library because we have a professor who is planning on doing a class on funk.
There you go. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll also mention briefly that there's moaning in Welcome to the Jungle by, you know, Guns N' Roses. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I was also interested in it's not only you know, the music itself and even text, but the dance moves, like go back to Elvis Presley. And Elvis Presley video or television, I understand, was only take pictures of him at certain angles or distance because of his dance moves that were considered too explicit for television anyway.
So Brett may be trying to phone in since he was having the trouble with the Wi-Fi with the. So he's got the phone number with the meeting number and the password. We'll see if he turns up. I see that there's one caller, but it was not his number.
Has anyone run into any kind of censorship or request for banning something or censoring something more contemporaneous than the 80s? Let's say something from the 90s or 2000s, or, you know, because as things became more explicit, maybe people who are still interested in in doing that. Has anyone run across that in your libraries?
Not in my library, but there was quite a lot of moral panic when Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion's WAP came out. Like people were really like about that.
I mean, this is kind of a niche comment, but I mean, as a cataloger, I still see all the time in sound recordings that note that people will put in, catalogers will put in, parental advisory, explicit lyrics or something like that. And I'm always of very mixed feelings about that. In part, like hearkening back to what our previous speaker said this morning about, anything that serves to label and sort of warn people away from something. And, I kind of always feel like in a, academic setting, 99% of the people accessing the material are going to be over 18 and able to make decisions for themselves. So I'm always kind of a little bit of mixed minds about those notes.
The one argument in favor of it, though, is that it describes the edition, because I was buying CDs, well, back when CDs were circulating, and you had the option of buying one or the other. And there was one point where when I went to reorder a CD that had gone missing, and I just gave the vendor the UPC on it, and he got back to me and he said, "Are you sure this is the one that you want? Because Berkeley usually buys the uncensored versions, and the UPC you gave me was for the censored edition."
Yeah.
And I had just gone based on the catalog record. Berkeley didn't bother to differentiate because it was an audience that did not care one way or the other.
Yeah, sometimes you would see those notes too, explicit version or clean version in an edition statement. Yeah, that's true, and that's a good point.
Well, even something like the Frank Sinatra piece that he played, where there's two sets of lyrics. I suppose that I wonder if that had been labeled or were in libraries, and which version of the song was probably most likely is probably the cleaned up version, more likely to have been in the collections.
I've actually I had never heard the Perfume version. I had only heard the Cocaine version of that song, so that's kind of funny.
I think I've only heard the Perfume version.
I think Ella Fitzgerald sings the Cocaine version on her version. But I was just gonna say that my children are really into, due to my husband, are really into underground hip hop. So Aesop Rock, Deltron, who's the other one? They listen to Gorillaz, LP. And I mean, there's a lot of swearing in it, but it's a lot of political and literary, and there's the lyrical content is just huge. So I think what you were saying, it really depends on who is listening to the music, why they're listening to it, and the context in which they're listening to it. My husband sits down with the kids and explains to them, you can use these words in certain, maybe around your friends at school or something, but understand not to use them around, and why certain people don't like those words. So
the whole racial component is tied up in this. I mean, again, when I was growing up, there was a show which some of you may or may not remember called Hee Haw, which was like the corniest. I mean, fabulous musicians. Like, the musicians who were on that show were excellent musicians, but it was, besides the whole cornball thing, there was all this sort of leering, lascivious, ogling, women in the shortest of shorts, and that was perfectly acceptable. That was white rural Southern culture, and that was oh, isn't that kind of, but you turn that into Black urban culture, and all of a sudden it's society's falling apart. So that would be a really interesting sort of exploration of how race and the culture that it comes out of plays into some of the same images. I'm sure it's been done many times, but that's one thing I just remember. My conservative you know, 50s era parents sitting there laughing hysterically at Hee Haw, you know, and I'm like, what is going on?
Hello.
Hi, you're back.
I am
Welcome
back.
back.
Thank you all for your patience. I am so sorry about that glitch.
Well, we went on and discussed, you know, some of our own memories of censorship. So,
I heard Hee Haw. That was quite that was a fun show. Also, in that same era, you had the Smothers Brothers, and I remember one big moment when Pete Seeger was on the Smothers Brothers, and he was singing a song called Waist Deep in the Big Muddy, which was a real allegorical kind of song about the Vietnam War and about going in so far you were in over your head. And that song, I remember that show was eventually shown, but there was a big brouhaha about it, and they held it back for a couple of weeks before the network finally relented and let them show it.
yeah, Smothers Brothers did get away with more things than some other folks.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead. We're still good. We're still good.
We're going to pray that this holds up for a time. Thank you. And where was I when you last heard me? Did I get up to God Save the Queen by the Sex Pistols? I did.
I played it while you were unavailable, so people have
Okay.
heard it in its entirety.
And did you all jump up and down and slam dance? And yeah. Anyway, that record was the most objectionable thing you could possibly do in England in the summer of 1977, because it was the Queen's Silver Jubilee. So never mind saying swear words, because there really weren't any on that record, but to actually disparage the Queen and to disparage the monarchy, that was a big one. And that record caused an absolute scandal in the UK. Radio, of course, would not play it. Things got so bad that they had to, the record apparently was #1. It sold an awful lot of records, but the charts would not say so. They put another record into the #1 slot and kept God Save the Queen initially at #2. You could walk into chain stores. They had, at that time in England, they sold records behind the counter. They didn't have them out in the stands to buy. And there was a top 10 chart, and where God Save the Queen should be, there was a blank. That title was scandalous. You could not even say God Save the Queen, even though it's on the English money and it's also the name of their national anthem. But in that context, it was absolutely scandalous. So what was England going to do about that? Well, they did everything possible to keep people from hearing the record, except taking it out of the stores. They did not actually suppress the record. Somehow there was this feeling that society did not go quite that far. They would not refer to the record, but they didn't suppress it. Therefore, it sold a lot of copies, made a lot of money. And as a result, the label that it was on, Virgin, became rich enough to ultimately open an airline and God knows what else. So there was, I think in America, we had not seen anything quite that threatening to the status quo being said in music for another few years anyway, because in America, once Ronald Reagan got into office, the permissive era was fast ending. I think a lot of you will be old enough to remember what the PMRC was. It was the group formed by Tipper Gore and other mostly female members who were all connected with the Senate, who were married to senators, who set up an advisory board to decide what songs could be played and what could not be. And they had their categories for what was wrong with records, if they referred to the occult, if they referred to violence, if they referred to sex. I believe the record they hated the most was Darling Nikki by Prince from the Purple Rain soundtrack, which was not only a sexy song, but very funny as well. But that one certainly got their ire, and it wasn't even a single. It was an album track that suddenly became very, very popular and very well known because of the PMRC's efforts. And this did have a real impact. They did succeed in what they claimed was their big aim, which was to get warning stickers being put on records. as far as America's youth were concerned, America's youth generally said, we can take care of ourselves just fine, thank you. And they proceeded to go out and buy records by people like Frank Zappa and Ozzy Osbourne, who were now more popular than ever because of the efforts of the PMRC. This preoccupied an awful lot of people as time was going on. And record labels were pretty much amused by it. Even FM radio stations were pretty much amused by it. MTV was just coming into play, and even though MTV, would censor certain videos, there were things like Girls on Film by Duran Duran, which was one of the more sexually themed videos ever made, but it was done in kind of an artful way. So by and large, these censors were out in force. They were not really winning the battle. And I'm going to play you a little bit of a song that did not get released. This one's, there were many, many responses to the PMRC that were done within the context of songs. This one was not released, but it's a very nice, very sweet love song, sort of, by that great pop artist, Todd Rundgren.
Hey, Brett, don't forget to share your audio again.
Oh, yeah, right. Sorry. Too bad that you're about to miss a good one. Share screen, advanced. Computer audio, yes. Okay, this is now being shared. So Todd Rundgren wrote this tender little love ballad.
You can take it the right way when I say I wanna fuck you, Jesse. I wanna fuck you, Jesse. Wanna fuck you 'cause I got every right to love a man who's stupid, ugly, and white. I gotta say fuck you, Jesse Helms. Hope you didn't think I meant another Jesse.
Yeah, that song, they're addressed to Jesse Helms, who of course was one of the main proponents of music censorship at that time. There are two other verses in the song. One is about Tipper Gore, and the third is about Pope John Paul II, all dealt with in a similar manner. The irony here is that that song about censorship and protesting censorship was in fact censored because he was not allowed to put it on the album that it was recorded for. But his record label did make sure that cassettes of it in plain white envelopes got sent out to critics and some radio stations. So they got passed around, and he performed the song live, and his fans heard it. So basically, the people had an easy target when the PMRC was in existence, and they kind of dug their own grave to some extent by not really knowing what they were going up against. One of their big targets was a song by Twisted Sister called Under the Blade, which had words like, you're tied down, your hands are tied, you're going under the blade, which was actually written to make fun of the bass player because he was going through surgery and he was really nervous about it, and that's the truth. But that was one of the songs they got up against. Things started to get less funny, however. One of the things that, not by the PMRC itself, but one of the things that happened around that time was Jello Biafra, who ran an independent record label called Alternative Tentacles, sang for a punk band called the Dead Kennedys, a name that a lot of people didn't like. Put out an album called Frankenchrist, which had a poster inside the record. And it was a poster by the Swiss artist H.R. Giger. The poster was called Penis Landscape. It was a painting that had that had shown in galleries in Europe, but it did show basically it was a wall of sex organs entering other sex organs. And Jello Biafra, for him, this meant kind of a statement on how we were being screwed by society. That's why he put the thing in his album. But his home was raided a couple of times. He faced a very long legal battle. The record label was in fact bankrupted. He's still alive and well to this day, but the censorship battle was starting to get a little more serious. People were getting more upset by things they were hearing. The things they were hearing were getting more incendiary, especially once we get into the heyday of hip hop. As we all can forget, maybe, that when rap music started, it was a very almost kind of wholesome, very inclusive thing. The first rap records were things like Rapper's Delight and The Breaks by Curtis Blow. And then little by little, more pressing issues began being dealt with in records. And there was a lot that the Black community did have to deal with at that time, which they wound up incorporating into their songs. Finally, by about 1988, I believe it was, America had its very own God Save the Queen, with a record that people were severely upset by.
Straight from the underground, a young nigga got it bad cause I'm brown. And not the other color, so police think they have the authority to kill a minority. Fuck that shit cause I ain't the one for a punk motherfucker with a badge and a gun to be beaten on and thrown in jail. We can go toe to toe in the middle of a sale. Fucking with me cause I'm a teenager with a little bit of gold and a pager. Searching my car, looking for the product, thinking every nigga is selling narcotics. You rather
that was a slight snippet of Fuck the Police by NWA. And as you can even hear on that record, it's not about mindless violence. It's about circumstances that, in their view, existed. They felt they were under siege and they were fighting back. This made a lot of people very, very angry. I was writing for the Boston Globe at that time, and I was speaking with community groups in Roxbury that were really upset by records like that one, by records like Cop Killer by Ice-T and Body Count, which were about the same thing. What else? Public Enemy, Fear of a Black Planet. People were kind of scared by what might happen in their community as these records took hold. Meanwhile, if you were a white kid growing up in the suburbs, you probably heard that these records existed, thanks to all the hubbub there was about them. But the forces of censorship were strong enough that you probably could not hear the records. There was no internet, obviously. Record stores were not selling them as yet. Some of them were, but under the counter. You had to sneak in past your parents. It was very hard to even hear those records. And as you can tell, I just called the thing up on the internet. It took me about 15 seconds and I played it for all of you. It wasn't that easy at that time. It really reached a breaking point with a record that was not even political. It was not even violent. It was the album by Two Live Crew called Nasty As They Wanna Be. That was the one that cost not only censorship, but arrests in Florida, if that sounds familiar. A record store owner was arrested for selling the album as Nasty As They Wanna Be, and the group itself was eventually arrested and spent a couple nights in jail. What the record was, it was very, it was kind of nudge wink, very graphic sexual humor of a kind that is heard in high schools from coast to coast. But to put it on a record, and was making so much money off such a record, was going to cause some problems. And I'm seeing a notice that my internet connection that's not really the case. There, Marcy's moving, good. After the True Live Crew, the music community still rallied behind them. They followed the album as Nasty As They Wanna Be with one called Banned in the USA that sampled the song Born in the USA by Springsteen, and they asked Springsteen
He's frozen again, I think.
So I'm hoping he will be able to return. I want to share an anecdote from a student I was working with last couple of weeks, who was interested in culture wars affecting rap music, and in particular the Rap Act that I think has been going through some state legislatures that hold that rap lyrics or song lyrics in general cannot be used as evidence in murder trials. This came up with a specific incident with that a rapper was arrested, and they're like, well, he described the exact crime in his song. And as the student was, very aware, they're like, there are lots of country songs that describe murders. And I said, yeah, and there's a whole genre of folk music called murder ballads, but nobody's been brought up for trial on that. Welcome back, Brett.
Thank you. Yeah. So I got us up as far as nasty as they want to be, which to my mind was the last time that that some kind of censorship was really in play. After that, well, you had the Dixie Chicks who criticized George Bush on stage, didn't even do it in America. They said it in England, and came home to find out that country radio, speaking of country music, had stopped playing the records, and they had to lay low for a couple of years. And they have still not become, they were getting up to Taylor Swift level in terms of popularity at that point, and they never.
I think he froze again. I'm really sorry that that's happened today, but we have got, I think he's back. You're back, in and out.
I sort of feel like all the groups I'm talking about, I'm trying to make sure you hear what I have to say in a really and I'm going to shut off my video.
Yeah, shut your video off, and then it'll help, I think.
Yeah. So I'm feeling like all these artists, so I'm like making sure you hear what I gotta say before I get yanked off the stage. I think one of the factors that's going to be in play over the next couple of years is that the music industry has enough power, it has enough clout to fight back. One thing that Ron DeSantis found out recently was that you can't really go up against Disneyland. They've got at least as much power as you do. The same applies for Live Nation, for the corporation that owns a lot of the concert venues, for Universal Music that owns a lot of the record companies. They're going to defend the rights of their artists to put anything out that they want to, and especially if they're selling large amounts of records. So I'm feeling that we're living out that old curse, may you live in interesting times. I think we've got quite a few of those interesting times to come. Thanks. Let's try it. Let's see if we can do some Q&A while I've got you all.
So I haven't seen any questions yet, but we do have a thank you from Holly Makovic. I must depart for a different shift. What a sensational session. What a sensational day. Regards to all.
Well,
you've left us all speechless, but we did fill in some of the gaps when you were unavailable.
Cool. Well, this was a great time.
Thank you. I'm glad that I got to hear both versions of because I also heard your practice run. So I was delighted to hear it twice.
Brett,
Oh,
I
man.
really appreciated the fact that you went over different genres of music and through different historical periods to show that some of the aspects of the censorship seem to be around the same issues, either whether something didn't fit community norms in terms of speech, like curse words, or the issues of sexuality and then race. I mean, those seem to be kind of themes that came across whatever the genre, whether it was rock or pop or disco or any of that. Is that
Yeah,
something found
I
to be the case, or?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think race is something that wasn't really dealt with, in songs. It was somewhat, but the earliest one I can think of is a song that Louis Armstrong recorded called "Why Must I Be So Black and Blue?" The jazz composer Fats Waller wrote it, and then of course there was "Strange Fruit" by Billie Holiday, which is about lynching, and that is one of the most powerful songs you will ever hear. And I think maybe because the pop world was not even aware of what she was doing and they did not really hear the song, it was able to get through. So in some ways you were able to say some of the strongest things back in the 40s and 50s. Yeah. Hello.
Oh, I was just curious, what your thought is about the popularity of these songs after they were censored and it was and they were more in the popular eye, I guess. I'm just thinking about a Steve Earle song called John Walker's Blues about John Walker Lind that when it came out, it wasn't even a good song, but everybody banned it, and then everybody brought him on their talk shows to talk about it before it was even out. And so, is that something that you see quite often, that these songs get a lot of press even though they're not that good, or the sales go up after they're banned?
Absolutely. I think, yeah, I agree that John Walker's Blues was not that good a song. I think basically Steve Earle wrote it in too much of a hurry. That would be my take. But yeah, for sure. During the 80s, Ozzy Osbourne wasn't really having that big a career at that point, nor was Frank Zappa or Twisted Sister. And suddenly, because the PMRC had targeted them, their career got a whole new lease on life. And I think once there's controversy, people are going to at least want to get behind it in some way. One thing I didn't mention was that after 9/11, the radio stations at Clear Channel, that whole organization, sent around a list of songs you were not supposed to play in the wake of 9/11. And at that point, Live Nation, Clear Channel owned most of the major radio stations in America. And the songs on the list that they advised against playing included things like Imagine by John Lennon and What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong, which were, to my mind, the kind of songs people really ought to have been hearing at that time. But I guess they did not want anything at all to be referred to. And one of the songs on the list, to many people's kind of amusement, was the AC/DC song called Shot Down in Flames, which is about it's about striking out romantically. It's about striking out with a woman. And the fact that it was on the list, I think, was one of the only things we had to laugh about during that time. So in a way, they did us all a favor with that bit of censorship.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That reminds me of some of the book titles today being thrown onto censorship lists because they're run through like a ChatGPT program.
Oh yeah.
And it's like somebody looks at the title, Shot Down in Flames, like, oh, we can't play that. That must be about something relevant to the World Trade Center attacks. And it's the same kind of a thoughtless, I mean, all censorship in some way is thoughtless, I suppose, but an especially thoughtless means of selecting material for a particular opprobrium, you know, it's kind of hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the funny ones to me was one song that got banned in England. Was a reggae song by Max Romeo called Wet Dream. The words are like, every night me go to sleep, me have wet dream, lie down girl, let me push it up, push it up. He was interviewed about that song and he said, innocent song, I have a wet dream because the roof over my bed is leaking. I was asking my wife for something to push up to keep the leak out.
I'm not entirely sure I believe that.
Yeah, I don't believe it either. I'm just going to turn me on so I can say hello to you all once more. Hello. Anybody want to throw anything else in?
Well, some of the censorship stuff like sparks more interest in these things, and I find that very interesting because I know in my own life, the story about Frankenchrist is how I learned about the dead Kennedys and started listening to them, and also how I learned who H.R. Giger was, who people don't know him. He's a major artist, and if you've ever seen the movie Alien, he did the set design for Alien. So, but I had never seen Alien when that scandal broke. So that's how I learned who he was. So, you know, you'd think people would learn not to censor because it just makes whatever it is.
He did another album.
Yeah. You'd think it makes that stuff all the
Well, we can, we're running a little bit over the hour, but we certainly can continue a few more minutes to wrap up. And I want to say a special thanks to Brett and Marcy. Thank you so much for manning the tech part of this and filling in. I really appreciate that so much. Brett, thank you so much for this talk and for, you know, getting us to think about censorship in such, you know, long-term way and implications for music. And our students are so interested in these kinds of things and these types of, you know, issues and things that come up and how they can also get attention. So
Right.
Appreciate that.
And really, I'd like to say a huge thank you again to Judy for pulling together 3 really fascinating presentations and a really timely theme, unfortunately timely theme. And so thank you to Judy and all the presenters, which they were all fascinating, great conversations. So thank you to all of you.
Thank you. So the last thing that I wanted to go over is, again, please feel free to contact me if you would like to help out with any of the activities for the spring event. And we'll be thinking about all of the subjects you suggested for topics. I'm going to definitely look into those. And if you have any other topics or any other ideas, please contact me, and we're going to get on that pretty soon. So thank you again. And Brett, thank you so much. I really learned a ton from
Thank you all. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
And have a good weekend.